I'm Jaden Jefferson, and welcome to episode 2 of my Race Through the States podcast, a weekly objective podcast bringing you the latest in election 2024, the big presidential election. We're going to first start out, because we have a few topics to talk about in this episode, we're going to first start out with Michigan. The state of Michigan has become important all of a sudden. And I say this because Ohio has tended to be the more important state. We often talk about the border battle and all the sports references and all those things, but in terms of politics, Michigan has won. I can't remember who won the football game, though. Not a sports guy. But I can say, though, this year Michigan has won the relevancy race because changing demographics have made the state so important for both campaigns here. Now, there are some things to think about, though, in terms of some weak spots that these campaigns have. Beginning with the Harris campaign, and we talked about this in last week's episode, that the war in Gaza has created some divisions within the Democratic Party. Some in the party who are strongly supportive of Israel, and then those who are very concerned about the humanitarian crisis of the war. And so Michigan, having such a large Arab American population, is a state that the Harris campaign is going to have to work to gain the trust of, because there are a lot of individuals who feel that the U.S. has contributed to a humanitarian crisis. And this issue is really big among young voters. You will definitely see a lot of younger voters who are really advocating for Palestinian people in different ways. And so that's going to be something that's going to be interesting to play out. I know polls do show that Harris performs well with younger voters, but there are quite a few younger voters who would have some thoughts about this situation. And then for the Trump campaign, it's going to be about union workers. The UAW, the United Auto Workers, they represent tons of union members across the country, especially in Michigan, home to the big three automakers in this country. And they've endorsed Vice President Harris. And so there is going to have to be that messaging about the economy and jobs. Now, that is something that polling shows former President Trump already performs very well on. It's the economy. And so that's going to be something that we're going to have to watch and see how his messaging plays out, because union jobs do make up a lot of the Michigan population. And so we're just going to have to see how his messaging translates, especially after the UAW endorsed his opponent. But like I mentioned, polls do show that the economy overall, in terms of that issue, he performs better on. So Michigan will be a state that will be in the spotlight. So Ohio, not this time around. And that, again, comes down to demographics. Ohio has consistently been a state that predicted the winner of the presidential election, but things change over time, and we're seeing that in real time. And then there's another interesting trend that we're seeing, and it has to do with gender. It's that male voters tend to prefer former President Trump, while female voters tend to prefer Vice President Harris. And two polls released on Wednesday really cemented that. One was from the Harvard Kennedy School Institute of Politics, and another from CNN. And this is definitely something that has become sort of important to the campaigns, because they're realizing this and trying to improve their messaging. So for the Harris campaign, there really is starting to be a targeted effort toward men, while the Trump campaign continues to try to hone in on the audience that they already have, which are men. So we will be seeing that happening, and you will also be seeing that happening in the campaign's messaging. So the gender breakdown is definitely something that's interesting, and if you get the chance to, definitely dive into those polls. But I do want to reiterate, though, that polls do have a sort of inaccuracy that happens. I remember talking with Dr. Melissa Miller, and we were talking about this on last week's show, that polling has changed over time, because there used to be a time when you could just call people up and they would answer the phone and happily provide their thoughts on the election. But we live in a different age now. Spam calls are pretty much everywhere. And so when people see a number they don't recognize, they may not answer the phone. So you do sometimes lose out on important perspectives when it comes to polling. And so that's something to think about. And then another thing to think about is the digital age as well, right? Who's being reached out to and who's responding, because some people are going to be more willing than others to chime in on polls. So definitely keep that in mind when it comes to polling. Now, some polls better than others, but you just at the end of the day have to understand that nothing is for certain, though this is some great data to have and to analyze. And campaigns use polling data as well. So it's not exactly that polling data is completely useless. It does matter to some extent. So think about that and chew on that for a little bit. And then the other thing to talk about, though, that's coming up, because this is something that people have thoughts about: vice presidential debates. When people are voting, it's pretty true that when people vote, they're voting for that main name on the ticket. But vice presidential candidates, they may not matter as much, but they are still a part of the ticket. And if they're elected, they will serve as the vice president. And we do have a VP debate happening on Tuesday. And this, of course, will be between Governor Tim Walz of Minnesota and Ohio Senator J.D. Vance. And so we will have to see what comes of that. But one thing, though, that I talked about in a past community focus episode has been the fact that both come from the Midwest. obviously Senator Vance from Ohio, and Governor Walz, who is currently serving as the Minnesota governor. I guess the real debate here might just be who's more Midwestern. I don't know, because the commentary around this has been one is more Midwestern than the other. Obviously, not at all a policy-based debate that some people are having, but it is a debate that has been had. So we'll just have to see what they talk about in terms of policy. But I can kind of give you a preview here, and it just may be the same messaging you hear from the main candidate on the ticket. And so for the Harris campaign, reproductive rights, that's their big, strong issue there. And then for the Trump campaign, you may be hearing more so about the economy. And that's definitely messaging I would say to expect to hear from both Governor Walz and Senator Vance on that debate stage Tuesday. And I believe that's happening on CBS. So if you'll be around that Tuesday evening and want something to watch that's maybe not a reality show like I normally do on a Tuesday, maybe throw it on over to CBS for the vice presidential debate. So those are your updates for this week. This has been Race Through the States, a little bit shorter of an episode than last week's show, but there will always be more to talk about in the next episode. So I look forward to that, but for now, have a great weekend. Thanks for listening. This has been Race Through the States, a production of Jaden Jefferson Report Studios. Remember that you can find continuing coverage on social media. Join me on X, formerly Twitter, at Jaden, Jaden_reports. My Instagram is under the same handle. Subscribe on YouTube and also join me on Facebook, Jaden Jefferson Reports.